Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session is about types of methods. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand what is the nature of different types of methods and what are the main types of methods. Well, it is useful for the purpose of analysis and understanding to cluster methods in terms of certain identifiable common features. You know, there are a lot of methods that are used in the language teaching process. Some people have given lists of a dozen of methods, 11 methods or 15 methods. However, none of these lists is exhaustive, and there is a huge debate over the total number of methods. And it is very difficult to differentiate one method from the other. In the theoretical sense, probably it is still possible to draw some distinctions, but when it comes to the practical application, to draw these distinctions becomes very, very difficult because there is a lot of overlapping of the theories and the approaches behind these methods. So in order to understand these methods, I think it would be a good idea to divide these methods into different clusters, to look at them as groups. And for this purpose, you know, based on the common features of certain methods, I would group them together to help you understand their nature with reference to the general characteristics that all the methods within one cluster have. So mainly I am going to use distinction or division that is into three categories: language-centered methods, learner-centered methods, and learning-centered methods, based on which methods focus more on the language, which on the learner, and which on the learning process itself. We would cluster them and we'd look at their qualities or characteristics. Well, when it comes to language-centered methods, principally they are concerned with linguistic forms or grammatical structures because their focus is on language. These methods and which methods come under this category? For example, audiolingual method seeks to provide opportunities for learners to practice pre-selected, pre-sequenced, pre-designed linguistic structures through form-focused exercises in the classroom. So what a teacher does is, who believes in the language-centered methods like audiolingual method, he or she would pre-design activities that would focus on pre-sequenced, pre-structured, and pre-organized linguistic structures that would be used in different activities for the learning process in the classroom. And what is the assumption behind that? The assumption is that a preoccupation with form will ultimately lead to a mastery of the target language. This set of these language-centered methods, they believe that once a learner has a mastery over the structures of a language, the learner would learn the language, would know the target language. As compared and contrasted to this kind of methods, when we come to the learner-centered methods, here the focus is not on the language that is to be taught. Here the focus is on the learner. So when the focus is on the learner, basically the teacher or the theorists who are behind the language-centered, learner-centered methods, they are more concerned with the learner, and thus they are more concerned about the needs of, the requirements of the language learners. Which methods can be included in this? Different variations or versions of communicative method, they fall into this category. And what do? They seek to provide opportunities for learners to practice pre-selected, pre-sequenced grammatical structures as well as communicative functions. So they do not restrict, they do not limit the teaching learning process to the teaching of grammatical structures or sequences. They rather go one step ahead, and they believe in, considering the functions, in teaching for which functions language is to be used. For example, speech acts such as apologizing, requesting, etc., through meaning-focused activities. So, if we look at language, different forms can be used for one purpose or for one function, and different functions can be performed through one piece of language. So, one utterance, when you say something, for example, when somebody says, "I am sorry," this can be an apology in one situation. This may not be an apology. This may be a sarcastic remark in another situation. This may be a rebuke even in yet another situation. This may be a criticism even in yet another situation. So, how for different functions, different sets of language can be used. This is what it focuses on. In the learner-centered method, what is the aim? It aims at making language learners grammatically accurate and communicatively fluent. So, the focus is not only the grammatical, knowledge and the correctness of language, but also the practicality of communication or interaction through that. They take into account the learner's real-life language use for social interaction or for academic study, and they present necessary linguistic structures in communicative contexts. So for the purpose of teaching, different communicative contexts are designed and they are used so that the learners could have real life-like experience. Proponents of learner-centered methods, like those of language-centered methods, believe in accumulated entities. So this is one of the similarities between the two. As far as the third type, the learning-centered methods are concerned, principally they are concerned with learning process. Unlike the language that is to be taught, language-centered methods, and the learners who are to be taught that language, unlike the learner-centered methods, learning-centered methods, they are more interested in the process of learning itself. These methods include natural approach, and they seek to provide opportunities for learners to participate in open-ended, meaningful interactions through communicative activities or through certain carefully designed problem-solving tasks in the classroom. In this approach, unlike the other the two approaches, language development is considered more incidental than intentional. So, it is not very tightly structured. This method, unlike the first two sets, this is comparatively loose, where incidentally, accidentally, through the process of using language, through the process of learning, the learner would learn language, and it is not an intentional process of teaching a particular, for example, structure to the students. According to the learning-centered methods, language development is a non-linear process and therefore does not require pre-selected, pre-sequenced, systematic language input, but requires the creation of conditions in which learners can engage in meaningful activities in the classroom. That would be real-life-like activities. And through this process of language learning, they would automatically learn the structures. They do not need to learn them in a sequenced way, where a particular structure, according to the first two, ways, is considered to be important to be taught to the students. Proponents of language-centered methods believe that language is best learned when the learner's attention is focused on understanding. Saying and doing something with language and not with their attention, where they would focus on explicitly the structures of the language. So whether it is language-centered methods, learner-centered methods, or learning-centered methods, all of these ultimately have one goal, that is to facilitate the processes of language teaching and learning in the classroom.